Welcome to Fix It Home Improvement, covering projects that every homeowner should know and great products for home and garden.
Hi, I'm JC, and this is where we share weekly home improvement tips. I'm here with my co-host, Cindy.
Hello, JC.
Hi, Cindy. This week, we're going to be talking about kitchen cabinet refacing and refinishing, and we'd like to thank Diana Loke for liking and sharing the podcast. In the early 1900s, most homes had freestanding cabinets in the kitchen, and one of the most popular styles was the Hoosier cabinet. So this had a large bottom cabinet with a pull-out work counter, and then there was a narrow cabinet above the workspace for storage. And most of these were on casters, so you could move them around the kitchen. Between 1900 and 1920, about 10% of all homes had one of these cabinets. In the 1930s, kitchen cabinets made out of metal were very popular, and they were advertised to be vermin-proof. In the 1940s, upper and lower cabinets attached to the walls became popular in kitchens. And it wasn't until the 1940s that electric refrigerators started replacing ice boxes.
What does that have to do with cabinets?
I don't know, I just thought it was interesting. If you have kitchen cabinets that look outdated or worn, you can reface or refinish them to update the look of your kitchen. And refacing is just replacing the cabinet doors and drawer fronts, and you're leaving the cabinet body in place. And if the exposed cabinet sides, the stiles, and the rails are all in good shape, this can be a very easy project. And usually you're going to change the hinges, doorknobs, or pulls, and it's going to give you a whole new look.
Exciting.
If the exposed cabinet sides, the stiles, and rails need to be repaired, or if you're changing the color, you can cover them with a variety of thin laminates or wood veneers. Some of these are going to come with self-adhesive backing, so it makes it very easy to apply them. And the wood veneers can come finished or unfinished that you can stain to match the new door and drawer fronts. And depending on the style you pick, it can be much less expensive than the cost of replacing your entire cabinets, and it's going to be finished much faster. Refinishing is covering all the exposed parts of your cabinets, like with a paint.
Or stain.
Or a stain, or you can put a laminate over them, but you're keeping everything. And this
Are we
is
going to talk about any of that stuff?
No, I'm going to mainly talk about repainting your cabinets. Another episode. We'll do something else. But you're keeping everything, and this is a good time to replace old hinges. You can update doorknobs and pulls, and that will really change the look of your cabinets. So I stopped by Home Depot, Menards, and Lowe's to see what type of individual doors, drawer fronts, and veneers they have for sale. And
Do they have any?
They actually had nothing in stock at all three. So I was talking to the cabinet design people, and at Lowe's, the gentleman I was talking to said the key thing is to know all your measurements. So he said take a ton of pictures and bring it in, and know the door sizes, the dimensions, the spacing between them, the inside frame openings, and then the type of cabinet, whether it's a frame or frameless style cabinet, and the type of hinges and how the doors overlay. And then they will help you order all of the parts you need. And most doors can be pre-drilled for the cup-style hinges, and that makes assembly much easier. And the doors come in a wide variety of styles, types of wood. Some are intended for paint only, and most come unfinished, and they're ready for stain and sealing. They also had white RTF doors.
What's that? Which
is rigid thermofoil. And this is a tough vinyl. It's usually over a fiberboard. And you need all the measurements for the stiles and the rails and the end panels if you plan on ordering veneers and covering those. And at Lowe's, they had PSA poly-backed veneers in maple, oak, and cherry with grain patterns. So you'll match your doors, and then you can stain all of this, or you can paint it. At Home Depot, they have somebody in the cabinet refacing department come out to your house for no cost, and they'll do all the measuring and give you an estimate for doors and drawer fronts.
Because they don't trust you to do it right?
It's probably a better decision if you've never done it before. And so the salesman I spoke to said they would also give you options based on the project. You can install it all yourself or have someone on their team do it. And they also show you different types of shelving and molding, so you can really change the look of your existing cabinets with just accents. At Menards, they have an in-store design team that help you pick the doors and colors, and they said they create a color computerized design so you can visualize the door shapes and all the color options, decide on hinges, doorknobs, and pulls. So they create like a visual for you that you can just sit and look at and keep changing it. And one thing that the gentleman at Menards said is they'll take a lot of these older style cabinets where they have the smaller doors and large spaces between the doors, and they go to larger doors where there's less space between it. And he said immediately it has a more modern look just by a subtle change like that.
You know, Menards is only in the Midwest, right?
Yes. I called a couple lumber yards here in the Chicago area, and
Why?
Because I was seeing if they sold individual doors and door fronts, and they didn't. But there's quite a few companies online that specialize in refacing where you can order individual parts. But once you pick your doors and your drawer fronts, if you're covering the stiles, rails, and exposed cabinet sides with veneer, you're going to have to prepare the boxes.
What's stiles and rails?
If you have your cabinet box and the opening has a frame around it where the hinge attaches and the door is closing against that, the stiles are the vertical pieces and the rails are the horizontal pieces.
Okay.
Most companies recommend sanding all the surfaces with a medium grit sandpaper, 100 to 120 grit, then wipe it down with a tack cloth, then clean all the surfaces with denatured alcohol, and that's going to remove any oil or grease. If the surface is unfinished wood, or if you've sanded off to the wood, you can seal it with varnish or shellac, and I would check how long it takes to cure before you apply your veneer.
Okay.
When you get your veneer, you want to check it for any problems, because that material is going to be very thin.
What kind of problems?
So it can have knots in it, or cracks, or holes. So once you get it, you want to open it up and verify that it's good, because
it comes in a roll.
Right. You can get wide rolls for the exposed ends of cabinets. You can also get narrow sections, so you can just use that for your stiles and rails. But it's sometimes easier just to get a large piece based on all of your pieces. So you're going to have to create a plan with the measurements, and then when you get your veneer in, you can use a pencil and draw on the sheet so you know exactly how you're going to cut it out. And then also you're looking at the way the grain runs. And you want the pieces that you plan on cutting to be wider than the piece you need. So you want it a 1/4 of an inch or a 1/2 an inch wider, so it's going to be easier to install, and then you're going to trim it to size.
Right.
When you're shopping veneers, PSA veneers are going to be the easiest to install. They have pressure-sensitive adhesive already in the back of it. Some veneers have to be ironed on. Some need to be glued on with contact.
How do you iron them?
I've never done it. But some of them you need to use an iron and a piece of cloth over it to activate the glue. Contact adhesive, some use contact cement. So check the installation instructions and the recommendations before you purchase. I really like the PSA veneers. And if you haven't worked with veneers, I would get a little extra when I purchase it so that you can practice on some scrap wood. Most veneers will have to be unrolled and laid flat in a living area in your house to remove their memory. And a couple of the companies I looked at, they were recommending unroll these and lay them flat 3 to 5 days before you use it. They want the humidity 30 to 55 for wood veneer and 55 to 85 degrees Fahrenheit.
Are you putting stuff on top of it?
You can put like a piece of plywood or a scrap piece of drywall on top of it just so it stays flat. And then you're going to need a utility knife with plenty of extra blades. You want to keep them sharp while you're doing your trimming. And then you can cut out sections with a razor knife, a laminate splitter. And then when you're trimming it down, you can also use a veneer edge trimmer. So there's some specialized tools you can get. To cut the big pieces, you can use a circular saw, but you want to make sure that you're getting a blade for veneer. It has a lot of teeth per inch. You can also use a paper cutter for cutting the length of the small pieces for the stiles and the rails, and they say that does a very good job.
Interesting.
When you're planning on how the pieces are going to lay out, look at the wood grain and what's going to show.
And you want it to match the doors?
Right. And when you put a piece in place, most companies are recommending a veneer scraper rather than a roller to press the veneer onto the cabinet.
What is that?
So this is a plastic blade with a handle. It's usually 4 inches wide, and it's going to actually create more pressure than a roller. And depending on the adhesive you're using, you may have to use brads to hold large pieces in place. And that's why I like the PSA veneers, because it sticks immediately, but you need to put hard pressure on it to activate the glue, and then you want to work that scraper in the direction of the grain. Then you're going to be using a utility knife or a veneer trimmer to cut off the excess. You can use a straight edge to help guide a utility knife, and you can score the veneer a few times, and that's going to make trimming easier, especially if you're going against the grain.
Okay.
For the trimmed edges, a fine sanding sponge or a file can be used to feather the edges so there aren't any burrs. And before you finish or stain the veneer, allow the glue to totally cure. And if you're filling any seams, you want to do it while your glue is curing. If you're staining, check the recommended products. Thin wood like this can react to water-based products. It makes them expand. So many companies recommend oil-based stains or finishes for wood veneers. And use a small amount and wipe it off fast to test how it's going to cover. And this is good to practice with a scrap piece also.
Right.
You want to pre-drill for your hinges. Then you're going to stain or finish all your doors and drawer parts. Hang all your doors, attach your drawer fronts. Put on your new hardware, and you may need a rubber mallet to tap cup hinges into holes in the doors. You can make a jig out of a scrap piece of wood, and this is an easy way to mark your doors so all the knobs and the pulls have the same spacing. And there are also jigs you can buy for drilling your holes. That way it's very fast and accurate. So refacing kitchen cabinets, it's a pretty easy project. You just need to be very patient and accurate when you're cutting down your veneer edges.
And practice.
Yeah, I would. If you plan on repainting your kitchen cabinets, you're going to need a plan and an area to do all your painting if you're removing the doors and the drawers.
Wouldn't you have to remove them?
So for some projects, if you have a frameless box, so your cabinets are like the European style and you have full overlay doors, a lot of these, the cabinet inside, so the box itself, is a completely different color than the exposed sides and the doors themselves. So what does
that have to do with anything?
So you can get away with some of these. If you have hinges that open all the way, you can paint the inside of your doors and drawers and leave the doors open until they cure.
So what, a couple days?
Right. And then you close them, and then you can paint all the outsides.
Yeah. This is much easier
than taking
them down.
But if you have framed cabinets and you plan on painting the doors and frames, you'll probably want to remove all the doors and the hinges, take the hardware off the doors and drawers. If you're replacing the hardware, getting new knobs and pulls with the same spacing as the holes in the drawers and the doors, it's going to make the project much easier. If not, you want to fill the existing holes with wood filler and sand them smooth before you're priming and painting. If you want to pre-drill all the doors now before you do the priming and painting, you're going to have less of a chance of damaging the new paint job.
Right.
You should create a drawing of your cabinets and label your doors and drawers. And if you're...
So you want a layout of where each cabinet goes.
Right. It's going to make it much easier to put back together. And on the doors, I would put where the hinges are. You just use a magic marker.
Or a pencil.
Right. Or anything where
any marking tool.
Where the hinge is going to go. I would put a little painter's tape over that so when you're painting it, you're not going to cover up the number. And if you're reusing your old hinges, put each of the parts in an individual baggie, give it a number that corresponds to the door. Because that hinge has been adjusted to that location, it's going to make it much easier to reassemble if you've got everything marked. And I would mark the hinges top and bottom with tape on it, and that way it's going to be easier to put together too.
Otherwise, you just have a mess.
Yeah, you're going to have to readjust everything, which is going to take a lot longer. And some drawer fronts are going to come off the drawer box. Some are going to be stapled or screwed into the box, and it's going to be much easier just to leave that all connected. And then remove your door stops from the doors. You're going to replace those with new ones when you install the doors.
Okay.
You want to degrease all the surfaces that you're going to be painting. And I spoke to Sherwin-Williams, and they suggested using Tsp or a Tsp substitute for removing oils, grease, and dirt from the cabinet and your doors.
What is Tsp?
It's trisodium phosphate, and this was a popular ingredient in cleaners before the 1960s, and they found that it caused excessive growth in algae in lakes and streams, and it kills fish and other plants. So for decreasing and cleaning parts, you'll see a lot of products that are labeled Tsp Alternatives or substitutes, and they're usually using sodium carbonate, which isn't quite as effective, but it's much better for the environment. A couple top rated are Crud Cutter, and that was actually recommended by Gianni Paint. Clean Strip, and that's a Tsp substitute. And Savogran has a liquid Tsp substitute. And Savogran was founded in 1875. It's Savogran. And they have a liquid deglosser that cleans off oil and grease, and it etches high gloss surfaces. So primers, they bond better. So rather than sanding, you can use this liquid deglosser, which is pretty cool.
Exciting.
Once everything is clean and dry, you want to sand all surfaces with a medium grit sandpaper. You can use liquid deglosser. You want to work in a well-ventilated area. You can put down drop cloths to trap the dust, then shake them out outside. You want to wear a good quality dust mask, 2-strap, N95 or higher. If you have an old home with painted doors, you want to be careful about lead paint. It was still in some paints before 1978. So you may want to do a lead test on the paint or talk to your village or consult a professional. Because when you're working with paint and you think there may be lead in it, there's a lot of steps to sand it or to degloss it safely. You might have to create a sealed room with plastic, wear a respirator with P100 filters, disposable clothing, booties, gloves, goggles, and wet sanding. So there's a lot of steps if you think that you have paint that might have lead in it.
Okay.
For sanding your parts, I like the sanding sponges. They're easy to work with. Sand with the grain and get into the edges and grooves. If you're going over painted surfaces, make sure that any chips or nicks, you're feathering all the edges of the old paint. You want to wipe down the surface after you've sanded it. You can use a wet dry vac and then wipe off the surfaces with a paper towel or a clean cloth. You can slightly dampen your cloth with a degreaser too. Once it's dry, use a tack cloth to remove any particles. Sherwin-Williams recommends using a bonding primer for excellent bonding to the surface. It's going to stick to almost any material for a stronger top coat. Some pros use a spray primer in the detail areas first, so if you have recessed panels. You want to prime the doors with a thin coat, use an angled brush in the corners and the edges, and then use a mini roller for the flat areas to blend the primer. You want to roll and brush with the grain. When you're priming your doors, you can do one side and allow it to dry and then flip it over and do the other side. You can set up 2x4s or 1x4s on the ground and lay your parts on that to allow them to dry. Or you can lay them on their edges and tilt it just so the corner is touching the wall to support it. So if you're painting your uppers, you can rest it on the top edge that would be sitting on the 2x4 or the 1x4.
Nobody sees it.
Right. And then when you're doing your bottoms, you would do the reverse. You'd set the bottom on there. You can also, so when I was spray painting cabinets, if we were doing wood doors, we'd drill a couple pilot holes, let's say in the upper doors for the upper cabinets. We would drill 2 pilot holes in the top of the door, and we would put really tiny hooks in it, and now you can hang it to spray paint them. So you can do the same thing in your house. You can also do this to allow them to dry, especially when you're putting your paint on so dust and particles aren't landing on it.
Right.
You can either, so I've seen some guys, they'll take a 2x4 and set it on top of a couple of ladders and put a bunch of hooks on that 2x4, and now you can hang your doors on that. Or you can take, let's say, a clothes pole and get hangers, metal hangers, attach the hanger to the hooks on the door, and then just hang the hangers on the clothes pole, and you can lay all of your doors right next to each other.
Fancy.
Check the label on the primer to see how long it needs to cure before you can sand it. Then you want to sand it smooth with a fine sandpaper and remove all the dust with a tack cloth.
So you'll be priming the rest of the cabinet at the same time.
Right. You want to apply your paint with a brush in the corners and edges first. And
Make
then,
sure you're using a quality paintbrush.
Right, absolutely. It's going to give you a much better finish. And then you want to blend and paint all the flat surfaces with a mini roller. 4 to 6 inches wide is easy to control. And a lot of the pros are recommending microfiber now. 1/4 inch or 3/8 inch nap. And a quality roller cover is also going to give you a much smoother, better looking finish.
It won't leave like fuzz behind.
Right. Let your first coat dry, usually 24 to 48 hours, but check the label before you apply your second coat. And if you lightly sand it with a fine sandpaper, you're going to get a very professional look.
Make sure you wipe it off with a tack cloth before you apply the second coat, though.
Right. You want to allow the second coat to fully dry before you install your hinges, hardware, and your door stops. Take a look at the label, how long they want you to let it cure. And once you put up all the doors and drawers, take a look at the finish under your kitchen lights. You may need to touch up areas with a thin coat of paint. So if you have any areas that have little imperfection or you can see brush marks, and some pros suggest hanging all your doors after the second coat without the doorknobs or pulls on, then put a thin third coat on while the doors are in place. You're going to get a very uniform finish and you don't worry about dust falling on the face of the doors.
Yeah.
When I spoke to Sherwin-Williams, they recommend Pratt & Lambert Aquenamel Waterborne Alkyd Enamel for cabinets. They also like the Do It Best Look Kitchen, Bath, and Trim Enamel, and some other top-rated cabinet paints. Benjamin Moore, their Advance, or their Insel X, so it's INSL-X cabinet paint. Valspar, they have a cabinet enamel that's rated very high. Dutch Boy cabinet door and trim. Behr has their Behr Premium Plus kitchen paint, and they use nanoparticles for strength and durability, and they say the finish coat doesn't allow dirt and oil to stick easily. And another nanotechnology paint is Beyond Paint.
We've used that.
Yeah, they say their microscopic particles penetrate into the surface to bond better, and they say it sticks to almost any surface. You don't have to strip or sand the surface. You just have to use a degreaser. And you don't have to shake or stir the paint. It has a slight texture so it doesn't leave brush marks or roller marks. So for corners and crevices, you use a paintbrush, and then on all the flat surfaces, you use a mini roller. You put a thin coat, you let it dry 2 to 4 hours, and then you apply a second coat. And once it fully cures, it takes about 30 days, it cleans off with soap and water. They say it's very hard for stuff to stick to it because of the nanotechnology.
Nice.
Another top-rated paint is Nouveau cabinet paint. It's NUVO, and this is water-based, low VOC, and this is a paint and primer in one, and they say all you need are 2 to 3 thin coats. And I would look for low VOC paints, wear an organic mask or respirator while painting, and have good ventilation, but you don't want to have fans on. It's going to stir up dust. Water-based paints are going to be easier to clean up. You're going to have lower VOCs.
Should you explain what VOCs are?
So volatile organic compounds, and they're a health concern. If you're breathing these in, as paint dries, they release VOCs. So you're looking for paint with the lowest VOCs.
Do you have anything else to add?
Refacing your cabinets can be an easy way to remodel your kitchen. Painting's going to be the least expensive, but it's going to be more work and planning.
Let's wrap this up.
You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, CastBox, Player FM, or your favorite podcast app.
If you enjoyed it, please leave us a review.
You can check out our home improvement videos on our YouTube channel, Fix It Home Improvement.
And you can subscribe to that as well.
You can download our books, Home Improvement Solutions, What Every Homeowner Should Know, on Amazon, book 1 through 5.
If you enjoyed it, please leave us a 5-star rating and review.
You can email us at fixitpodcast@gmail.com, and you can follow Cindy on Twitter @FixitCohost.
Thank you for listening.
Talk to you next week.